What's up, everybody? Welcome to CFP Talks. My name is Jonas, and with me, as always, is Mr. Raman saying, Mr. Raman, I'm gonna steal your line. I'm gonna steal it. I'm gonna steal it. I hear about students going to these review courses, and then the instructor sits there in the front, reads through a bunch of PowerPoints, goes through it as fast as can, and then said, "Hey, Mr. Instructor, Mrs. Instructor, I have a question. What if we get these long paragraphs? How do we break those down? How do we attack them?" And then you get this answer. And I always felt that, like, when I heard this and I went to review classes for various things, whether it's CFA or CFP or Series 7 or any of these things, and they go, don't even bother reading the entire problem. Read the last sentence and then read the answers. If a student is coming to you with that, how do you typically tackle that? And then how do you actually help them solve these big paragraphs? Because I think one of the things that a lot of students walk into the exam is, I'm going to get what I saw in my Q bank. And then I got really kind of turned upside down because I didn't expect the questions to be this long. And I spent so much time reading. How are you typically dealing with this? I mean, it's
Man,
such
you're
a
talking about a
touchy.
hot topic here. This is like
Hot takes
yeah, it's
right
kind of like,
here live on CFP Talks.
it's like people trying to tell me how to make my baby go to sleep. It's kind of like, man, like
Ooh,
it's
hot
all
takes.
right. Like you wanna start a war right now, but but no, Joe, I think you bring up a very good point simply because a lot of the students are getting general advice. It's kind of like, imagine this. I mean, you guys who are, people watching this video and listening to this podcast, how often do you hear a client say, well, I'll just buy the S&P 500. I'll just buy the S&P 500 and put money in a cash account. Why would I need to do anything fancy? It's just like, I don't need to, right? Can you do that? Sure. Does it apply in every person's situation? No, it does not. It might apply in some people's situation if they happen to get lucky at it, right? If you feel like you're one of those lucky people, sure. However, do I believe that's the right way of approaching things? No, I don't think so at all. How would your client feel if you just jumped right into the questions, but not really truly understand their situation and who they are?
That's hot fire right there.
Ooh, ooh,
Oof.
you get me started, man. But go on.
It's it's why CFP even started this exam, was to get rid of generic advice like mutual fund guys calling and saying, I got a fund to sell you today, or I got a stock, and they would sell it if you had money, right? It was like the old Wall Street adage is like, you do you have a heartbeat in a bank account? Then you are, this is suitable.
You're qualified.
You are qualified.
Yeah, so and to answer your question, because I've had students like, oh my God, Ramen, like this sucks. Look, I hate these long questions. Oh my God, I hate these long. And I'm like, well, you better get ready for it because a lot of those questions are gonna be on the exam.
Oh
The
yeah.
CFP exam is, as we talked about in our one of our podcasts, it's a marathon, right? You're
Mm.
running a marathon, so you gotta train for it. But most importantly, you gotta train for it the right way. So how do I approach it? I I'm a big believer of keyword identification, right? You have to know what the question is asking you. You have to understand sure, read through the answer, but you have to know what the question is asking you, understand the client situation. Because, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong. All it takes is one word. And what's that one word going to do?
Change the entire thing.
Change the entire thing.
Yep.
You know,
One not, one accept changes
I,
everything.
I saw this one question. It said, I think it was a Dalton question. It gave a situation where it required to use the dividend discount model and
Mm.
the CAPM, right? And then it also gave next year's market return, Joe, and it gave a risk premium. So my
Mm.
student said, "Why did I get this wrong?" I said, I know it's asking about dividend discount model. So automatically, without reading the question, guess what they did? They just used the market return and the risk-free rate of return and got the answer wrong. Didn't realize that the market return on the question said it's the next year's market return.
Mm.
And they gave you risk premium for this year. Things to think about.
And how many times does that happen through the course of an exam?
Oh, I mean, like misreading questions and oh my God, I think that would, if let's just say you know everything about the material and you're bound to pass this test, you'll fail this test if you misread questions.
Yeah.
That by far, like I would say, that's the number one reason why those people fail those tests.
Well, I've seen a lot more people fail because of sloppiness and misreading than because of knowledge,
Yes, I would agree with that.
right? Like there's a lot of people that walk in and even though you may not necessarily feel confident with your knowledge level, which usually is alleviated by practice, but if you go in there and and I've seen it even within our own course where somebody really the knowledge of the materials there and then they go into the exam and the exam gets the best of them because they misread and they fall for all the easy tricks.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
for me, even when I'm writing certain things, like I want to make sure that you're reading the entire question. So I'm going to put a detail in the middle that if you read it, you get the answer right. And if you
Man,
don't,
you made me just answer the question I was about to ask you. I was
oh,
gonna say,
okay.
Joe, why don't you tell us how you prepare students to
Yeah.
make sure that they don't make those type of
Yeah.
mistakes?
And you'll, as we, especially when we're building cumulative exams. And the purpose of cumulative exams is to give you not just the number of questions. And the thing is like you're tired. Question 80, question 85, if you're taking a full simulated exam, even if you're just doing half an exam a day and you're going through 85 questions, let's say, leading into the exam a week out, you're going to, all right, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to learn, I'm going to prepare myself to do this. By halfway point, you're pretty smoked because the
Yeah.
attention to detail really needs to be there. And I think like I like your keyword identifier. I think that's a lot very helpful for a lot of students. We saw, it was something that you recommended in our last class in March. I'm a big believer that you can really attack the question any way in which you're comfortable. If you want to start by reading the last sentence first, great. I don't mind that. I My preference is I like doing that because it helps me focus on what I'm looking for because I'm identifying what the question is asking and then I can go into the question and pull out what's relevant as I'm reading.
Right.
And so, if I'm looking for, what is the intrinsic value of the stock and they give me a whole paragraph, I'm probably pulling out three or four things where there's a lot of irrelevant data in there. But does it help me focus? Now, can you do it the reverse way? Of course you can. You can start at the top and read it. But once you read the question, you may have to go back and dive back in and then pull out the relevant. Either way, you're going to have to pull the relevant data and you're going to have to identify what the question is asking and then all those keywords that you've been talking about. Then I can go and I can solve the problem. So,
Absolutely. So Joe, no, and thank you for sharing that. I feel like that's a super important thing for our listeners to understand that there's no right or wrong way to do it. You just have to be diligent
consistent.
about it. Yeah, consistent.
Consistent.
So you mentioned something earlier. You said, by the time you're at question 80, and next thing you know, like you get this long question. And I'm talking about real exam. Forget the practice question. And you're like, how do students prepare themselves to make sure that they don't go through this fatigue on the exam? Because I mean, I've had students they literally failed before they brought me in their life, but they failed because they're like, I ran out of gas.
Hmm. What do you do?
I just make them go like practice more.
Yeah.
I
Endurance
make them
training.
practice more, basically. And I'll tell them like, you're not doing a 60 question test. I will tell them like every time you're gonna take your benchmark exam, you're gonna take a 135 question or even 150 question benchmark exam because I want you to build up that stamina.
Yeah. I mean, if I were preparing for a race, well, how do you get better endurance in a race? Like, well, you got to train, right? And so if you're not intentional about your training, and one day it's 30 questions, and another day it's 100 questions, and next day it's 20 questions, you're never going to build endurance that way.
Right.
And, you can try to do it linearly. It doesn't really work because you're going to wear yourself out and you're going to burn yourself out if it's too linear. And so there's a common mistake, but you got to train endurance wise, meaning you have to go through the trudgery of sitting your butt in a chair for 3 hours uninterrupted and undistracted. And I
Yep.
mean, no cell phone. I mean, no email. I mean, no, like, I mean, zero distraction.
Right.
And you can't possibly be ready for the exam. And I think this happens more often than not. And I see this a lot with my FINRA students because FINRA students commit the sin more often than CFP students. You have a practice exam to do and you'll do half in the morning and then half at night.
Yeah.
You're saying like, no, 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 you can't do that. Like you got to do the full exam. And I remember I got into, um, me and a student were having this conversation. I'm like, please stop splitting the exams. You can't do it because you're going to freak yourself out on exam day.
Yeah.
And her retort to me was, well, I just scored an 82. Why would I change that? And I said, because that's not the way it's going to be on exam day.
Right.
Goes in and fails the Series 7 at a 64 after
Wow.
scoring over 80s on four straight exams.
Wow.
You know why?
The stamina.
Ran out of time.
Oh, ran out of time? No way.
Got
Wow.
to, so you know how there's 135 on the
Yep.
7?
Yep.
Got to question 118. Missed 17 questions because she missed,
Oh, that's an automatic fail at that point.
right? So like think about it. Like had she finished and stayed at the same pace, she would have passed by because remember, she didn't answer 17 questions and still got a 64.
Yeah.
So like again, she only needed a few more questions to finish up. And
Right.
even if she only got half of those right, you're either really close or just overpassing.
Right.
Like that is a crazy thing. And I remember she came back and she was like, and you know, was obviously very upset that she didn't pass. And she's like, I don't know what I did wrong. And I was like, you didn't prepare for the exam. So you didn't know how to manage your time
Yeah.
because you got so used to, okay, I'm staying under the time frame, but I split it. And you didn't take into account that you're going to get really tired in the middle. And when you're usually taking your break and coming back later, and so we have students who do the same thing here with CFP. They don't train properly. You
Yes.
can't do it by training in 30 question increments. You can't do it by training in 50 question. You have to mimic the exam and build that endurance over time.
Absolutely. And one thing I would like to add on to that is the some of these long, overwhelming questions that we have. I tell my students to slow down on those questions specifically during practice days so they don't try to like speed read a question immediately. So if you slow down and you read through those questions thoroughly and understand how these questions are structured and you just start doing that due diligence 3 months before the exam, 2 months before the exam, by the time you get to the exam day, you're not going to be at that slow pace anymore. You're going to actually read through, like Joe, when you and I read questions, I mean, I can read a really long question pretty fast and understand exactly what the question is asking me because we've trained ourselves at that point. And that's what I tell the students, like, listen, like, don't try to rush through these large, overwhelming questions. Just be consistent with understanding how they work.
Mm.
So once you keep doing that and you start building that stamina, that the 3 hour sitting down 3 hour and knowing that, okay, I don't care how long these questions are. I mean, I dare you, whoever's watching these videos, turn on a test and just try to focus on just answering those long, overwhelming questions and see how long you last and until you say like, oh, I'm tired. And you gotta keep practicing that until exam day.
That's right. And you have to go through it. There's no way around it. And I think anybody who tries to shortcut the process, you're gonna end up on the wrong side of the pass line
Yeah.
because and there's no way around it. We all have to trudge through it. Everybody has to sit down and do it. You know, it's like running 10 miles. There is nothing glamorous about running 10 miles. And at mile 5, you're like, I ran 5 miles. I've done good today. Oh, let me call it a day.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, you can't. You have to learn how to get through that middle part of the race because
Mhm.
and like in any workout or anything long, the beginning is easy and the end is easy, but that
It's
middle part, oh,
if that's the
You know,
That's the most challenging part,
yeah,
right?
and like they call it the middle six in football, and in the NBA they'll say the way you end the second and start the third, the teams that end the half and start the next half, the strongest usually win the game
Mm,
because they've trudged through that middle part where it's like it's the boring part of the game. Right?
yeah,
4 minutes left in the second. Okay, who's going to play harder? And
right.
the team that makes the plays in that last 4 minutes and the first 4 minutes, because again, it's very easy to be motivated at the beginning of the game. You're energetic, you're ready to go, you warmed up, the crowd's screaming, I'm hyped, I'm
Man,
ready to go.
man, you sound like you're talking about my Texans right now. They do well the first the first half, the second half, they just gas out, man.
But and you watch teams that like magically turn their seasons around. They're like, what did you do differently? They're like, we learned how to play the game.
Yeah,
And that's it. And this exam is very much along those lines where you have to learn how to manage yourself throughout this entire process. I think that's a probably a pretty good place to stop. So
yeah,
as
yeah.
always, everybody, we hope that you enjoyed this episode. With any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out, and I will see you guys on our next episode. Take care, everybody.